Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza from the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, and I am here today with a very special guest, and I'm actually very excited to talk to her. I am talking to Jen Miller-Osborn. Now, if you don't know who she is the Deputy Director of Threat Intelligence for Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks. And Jen, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Soon to be the weekend.
I'm
So
glad it's Friday.
yeah,
Very glad it's
yes,
Friday.
it has been quite the week, I think, in America in general. And with that, I'm very glad that you were able to join me here on this Friday afternoon. And so with that, let's dive right in, because I think some of the audience is not going to know exactly what Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks is. And so can you enlighten us?
Sure. So Unit 42 is the threat intelligence team within Palo Alto Networks. We're unique from a lot of our other teams in that we are solely tasked with doing research and ensuring that our customers are then protected against it. So we work very closely with all of our product teams, but we're not tied into that kind of development lifecycle that would usually go along with having to do that kind of work. So that lets us do, if we need to do a longer term project that's going to take a couple of months, we can do it. And when new things happen, like when a lot of attackers turn around and started using all the COVID themes as lures and decoys and domains, we were able to kind of jump on and pivot onto that relatively quickly. We're not
Right.
a really big team. There's about 40 of us, and we're kind of spread all over the globe. But that also gives us some flexibility with being aware of different situations. And yeah, our job is basically just to stop bad guys. So another part of how we do that is our blog and the playbooks that we publish. And that's because we feel that threat intelligence should be shared freely so that the most number of people who can make use of it can use it. How you then protect against it is kind of the secret sauce or the magic or whatever. Having the knowledge itself doesn't necessarily, you need, the defenses are harder to create. So we share that so we can have, everyone can be aware of what the current threat landscape looks like. Like my mom can go read about it if she wants to see what's going on. Other customers can go read about it to see how they're protected and what we're seeing. Competitors can go read about it and ingest it themselves and have an idea of what we're seeing. We just feel that's really the best approach to do a sort of herd immunity kind of overarching goal. The more people that can roll out protections and be aware, the more protected we all are.
Yeah. Well, and I know we read it over here as well. I mean, for me, I wake up every morning and I've got a dedicated daily reading, and Unit 42 is one of those ones I always check.
Awesome.
Which is why I'm kind of geeked out to have you here as well, because I think you're doing the Cyber Lord's work.
Nice, Cyber Lord. I haven't heard that one before.
There you go.
That one now.
That's my own personal lord in cybersecurity and all of that. But since Unit 42 is on the front lines, then looking at the bleeding edge of threats out there daily and worldwide, since you're scattered all over the place, can you tell us some of the latest threats that Unit 42 in Palo Alto is catching?
So the biggest thing that we've seen lately, especially that was a shift, was when all of the attackers started leveraging anything COVID related for attacks. And it was unprecedented because we'd never seen basically every attacker start taking advantage of the same thing. Typically, because it was a global pandemic, they were able to leverage everyone's anxiety and everyone's fear instead of it being typically what we would see where it's more targeted to news or politics or some sort of local disaster in a given region. And that included all of the criminals we saw shifting to it, who typically did the types of spam where it's, your Amazon package or your order or your credit card, all of them shifted to that as well. And a lot of other scammers shifted to that. So we saw a massive uptick in just scam websites that were offering people everything, anything that they thought people might be interested in. And in some cases, they might have actually gotten some sort of product. It was never what they expected. But in most cases, all they were doing was losing their PII and their credit card information and all that kind of stuff. So that's really been one of the biggest shifts I've probably ever seen. And I've been doing this for about 20 years. So we're starting to scale off now. It seems to have hit kind of, at least from our visibility, sort of peak saturation at this point. For a while. We're starting to see attackers returning to using different kind of themes and lures to go after people. But yeah, this was just totally unprecedented. It was crazy. I know obviously we work together on the league, so you totally understand how it just, it was amazing to see how this community came together though. Like that was one of my favorite things, was to see like people from all over the world joining and jumping in together in like the Slack channels and sharing information, including with law enforcement to go after stuff. That was, that was also unprecedented, I feel. But it was an awesome unprecedented.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, in that vein, I mean, we are more than 4,000 members in the coalition, you know, actively working together to try to keep everything safe. And what's interesting too is I think just the entire cybersecurity community just had to take a step back when this hit. Like you're saying, everybody, like every media from, you know, Podunk wherever to the New York Times is all about the coronavirus and what you should do, you know. And I don't care what country you're in, everybody knew about it. And so how could you know, an attacker not look at that and say, well, everybody's talking about this, so this is clearly the, you know, the best place to throw my lures out there. And you know, I think that's absolutely right. You know, and in that vein, I mean, we have a lot of frontline infrastructure like hospitals and all of that. And by virtue of that, Palo Alto Networks has a massive presence in, you know, various governments around the globe, healthcare systems, et cetera, et cetera. And since the pandemic seems to have just ramped up these threats, as we were talking about, against these kinds of institutions, not to mention all the remote working, you know, that's going on and all of that. And a lot of people are rushing to that. And I could tell you horror stories that I've been called in on the last couple of months. Can you tell us how Palo Alto Networks and Unit 42 are adapting to meet the demands of these attacks?
Sure. So in addition to all of the research that we've published, which is 6 blogs on just COVID themed attacks we saw in various kinds of places, which is the most we have ever written on a given subject like that.
Wow.
Like that, it's just a ton of research covering everything, you know, from cloud environments where this was happening, all the way through talking about all of the domains that were registered and scam websites. We saw an interesting thing where Silver Terrier, which is typically Nigerian cyber criminals, they actually started using it to try to make money as well, which was kind of an interesting adaptation for them to do.
Right.
And as a company, what we did, since obviously we're in a position where securing remote workforce, that's part of what we do. Like that's a big part of our business. So what we did, in addition to everything our customers currently had access to, we started offering things for people that weren't current customers, that were kind of enhancements for customers that perhaps hadn't really gotten to the remote workforce component yet, or that hadn't really been part of their typical business plan. And what we started doing was we were offering free deployment services. And that means that when you bought you know, one of our next generation firewalls or things, you automatically got an actual person to help you make sure you were implementing everything correctly, which is typically something that is a separate kind of paid thing. But we wanted to make sure, as people were kind of trying to ramp up really quickly into the space, we wanted to help them do it as safely and as best as possible. So we offered that for free. Existing customers that had our Prisma access got free additional licensing if they needed to expand it, now that they had so many more people working outside the office than they typically did. And then we also extended a free global protect trial to anyone that didn't currently have it, to try to protect their remote workers. So we took all of the things that we typically, you know, sell or we productize more, and we, in an effort to ensure our customers were protected, or to ensure even people that weren't our customers, if they wanted to come with us now, to help them get set up securely and safely as quickly as they possibly could.
No, and I think that's great. You know, and it's one of those things I think that a lot of organizations need help with, especially if, you know, they've got, let's say, they're soon to be up on renewals. You know, I'm sure that helps with that. And I can just say from personal experience and you know, working you know, with Palo Alto firewalls in the past, you know, it's a college course to set up one of these compared to some of the other firewalls or competitors out there. And so having that service, especially in a time where we are seeing just a massive amount of attacks, you know, come on, I just was talking to a recent a CISO from a health system who said they were seeing a roughly 30,000% increase in phishing, you know, so that is, that is
depressing.
It
really
is.
That's what you're going to target? Like,
honestly,
come on.
You know,
almost literally anything else.
Anything else. I know. Well, but it's such an easy way. It's the largest delivery system that we've had in threat, you know, and it's not stopping, you know, and all of that. And I think that actually kind of dovetails into the next question that I had for you, because obviously one of the biggest issues we're seeing, you know, is that much of these cyber attacks, they're phishing or ransomware or whatever they are coming against infrastructure, and they're coming from foreign countries oftentimes. And we've been seeing that that's not new to the coronavirus situation, but it is obviously being wrapped up, whether it's state-sponsored actors or just groups, or, you know, that that 400-pound fat guy in New Jersey, whatever that is, So can you comment on where Unit 42 or Palo Alto is seeing a lot of this activity coming from?
Sure. So we actually don't really look at it on a country basis necessarily, just
Okay.
because we have customers or potential customers anywhere,
Sure,
basically.
of course.
So
Right.
it's difficult for us to look at it that way. One of the things we use to determine maliciousness, especially when we're looking at some of the domains in the IP space, is whether or not they're a bulletproof hosting provider.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
98% of bulletproof hosting tends to be malicious in some way, shape, or form, because that's what the criminals prefer to use.
Right.
Because they offer those. For people that don't know what the bulletproof component means,
Mm-hmm.
it means that you're typically paying in some sort of Bitcoin or other digital currency, and they aren't keeping records of who you are or what you're doing with your website. So it's really, really popular for criminals because the companies basically give them a shield.
Zero
So
login.
anything we see coming from that space
Mm-hmm.
is more, that's kind of the way we look at it more. We try to look at it a little bit more broadly, because we can't, say this coming from this X country is bad.
Right. Right. No, and I get that, and obviously, I could be sitting here in the United States and make myself look like I'm coming from anywhere
Yeah,
on the planet.
exactly.
So, I just didn't know, just given, what Unit 42 is, having, an insider's look compared to most of
It
the planet,
changes all the time. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, it's just, it
Yeah.
totally changes just based on their,
Yeah.
whoever their provider is. One month it could be, we're seeing a ton coming from the United States. I mean, we've had a couple of things where we published a lot of the things were hosted in the States or seem to be coming through there,
Hmm.
and then the next month it's Germany. The next
Yeah.
month it's somewhere else. Like, it's not really consistent.
No, not the Germans. I can't believe that.
Or people
So,
pretending
yeah.
they're in Germany. So.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There it is. Just being part German myself. There you go.
Me too.
So yeah, there you go. My shirt actually says Germany on it. I don't think you can
Oh,
see
nice.
There you go. Obviously, we also know that just overall, cyber attacks have been increasing. Every year is the worst year ever for data breach, record count, and on and on and on and on. And, I talk to a lot of clients and I'm on stage talking about that quite a bit. But in terms of this pandemic, I'm sure you guys are seeing that it's increasing faster, probably through the pandemic, than it has before. Are you guys starting to see that like taper off? Is it still exploding? Like, what are you guys seeing? And obviously, we have a new news cycle that's been dominated for the last week or two with the just incredibly unfortunate incident, with George Floyd and all of that. So what are you guys seeing in terms of that increase as it happens over time?
We definitely saw a massive uptick immediately once this happened. Say starting January-ish is when we really started to see things ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of peaked like March-ish, March, April. And then since then we started to see kind of a downward trend in just the popularity of anything COVID related to use for attacks. They're starting to either use other current events, or they're going back to their old typical, hey, your Amazon package was delivered kind of thing.
Right. No longer UPS. Now it's Amazon.
Yes.
Interesting how
FedEx
that evolves.
package, like,
right.
yeah.
Right. Now, from what I understand, and I want to shift gears a little bit to the coalition here, and how we are working behind the scenes, if you will, with Palo Alto Networks. From what we understand, Palo Alto is actually ingesting our block list that we've been putting out here. And so I'd be curious to know, how do Palo Alto customers use the threat intelligence that our coalition is supplying to Palo Alto, and obviously the thousands of others that are ingesting our block list at the moment?
We use it to augment all of our DNS security products, basically. So we use it to enhance our block list, and then we rolled into that. And then, once that goes into production, that it's pushed out to everybody within 5-10 minutes. So we ingest them, and then it's pretty easy to ingest, IPs and domains and things like that, especially when we know they've been vetted and they're bad. So we really just roll them into production pretty much as soon as we get them. And it's been great. And then it goes, everybody has them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I'm sure everybody that's listening to this running one of your endpoints or firewalls is thrilled to hear that as well, because
yes,
we work very diligently.
We do.
Yes, yeah, we vet a ton, so I'm very happy to hear that.
And that was the perfect thing to provide, because that was one of the most difficult things when some people started wanting to share around this, was the lack of vetting. right? And then that can take a lot of time, and that's not necessarily time with everything else on fire right now that a team had time to do. So being able to take something that you know is going to be good and you don't have to worry about it and just pull it in that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, and we've worked very hard to that, and we're actually ramping that up to engage even more volunteers to increase the vetting capabilities. So it's
Awesome.
been a real labor of love on this side. But just because I've got you and I'm a nerd for these kinds of things, I have to know, what is the most interesting new attack that Unit 42 has discovered in the wild in the last couple of years? What was just blew your mind? Anything.
It usually blows my mind for bad things.
Well, you are in that business. I mean, that's okay. You're allowed
I
to
can't
be
believe they
mind blown
did
by
that. Some of the stuff that I actually thought was fun was seeing attackers going back to things we hadn't seen them use in a while, right? Seeing people going back to doing email for C2 and for exfiltration, and just some of those old school things that used to be really prevalent. And, we had to put a lot of effort into learning how to block. And now that it's not something that attackers use anymore, it's, you protect against what you think they're doing, not necessarily what you knew they were doing like 5-10 years ago. So one of the things I've been finding fascinating is seeing some of these groups start pulling out things, that are 5 or more years old, just to see if, that kind of protection that we're thinking has aged out, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because you don't necessarily think about it. And I'm just wondering then, in that case, if the guy's like, well, I haven't used it in 10 years, so nobody will see it coming,
Exactly,
or if it's just really lazy, like, oh, I read about this sounds like a good way to do it. I'd be very curious to know, just in that mentality, not that I'm interviewing malicious attackers anytime soon. Although if you are one, please feel free to contact me. I will interview you, possibly call law enforcement on you. I'm just saying. With that, I want to thank you for your time here, because this has been like super cool, and I think it's just really interesting to see what the front lines are seeing and how you guys are reacting to that. And I know you're one of those big presences out there in critical infrastructure, so it's really good to have that perspective. And thank you very much, for being with us, today. I really appreciate that. Now, that said, if anybody wants to follow you or Unit 42 or Palo Alto Networks, feel free
Which
to
plug. They should. I mean,
yeah, I'm not saying no. It's daily reading for me. If you publish daily, I always check. But
awesome.
If how can people find you or Unit 42 or Palo Alto Networks?
Sure. So our blog website it's really long, but it's unit42.paloaltonetworks.com, or you can just Google Unit 42 and it'll come up. We are not the Dutch television show. You'll notice there's a little E after it. We're not them. It's the Palo Alto Networks website. And then we also have a Twitter handle. It's unit42_intel. If you want to follow that, we also make sure we push all of our blogs out with tweets whenever we publish. And obviously our parent website is paloaltonetworks.com.
Great. Well, again, Jen, thank you very much for joining me, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. This is fun. Have a good weekend.
You too. Take care.